I've always had procurement at my leadership table, and that I don't view procurement and sourcing as being an order-taking organization. I view it as a key partner and strategic partner. There are several things I really look for. First of all, somebody who can take the complex and make it simple. Second is a CPO that asks why. They're sitting there with you and saying, well, maybe that doesn't make sense. Challenging convention and wisdom, not being somebody that brings what I call silent no's to the table. Nothing frustrates me more than for them to listen in a meeting and have a silent no, have a different opinion and not put it on the table in the meeting. So I really value that partner who has the ability to say, and not tell me what they feel, but tell me what they believe. Hey, Bill, I believe that we should be looking at it this way, and challenging me, because we're smarter collectively than we are individually. So if I don't have that CPO partner who wants to be at the table, understands that it is time consuming to be in my leadership team meetings, but understands also that 1 + 1 will equal 3 if we partner, is really critical to me.
I'm John Pavia, executive producer for the Smarter Sourcing podcast. When we started this podcast, our mission was to explore the ways in which the role of the Chief Procurement Officer is evolving, especially after the worldwide supply chain crisis we all experienced during the pandemic. Today's CPOs are not just functional heads. They are strategic partners with a seat at the decision-making table. They hold the key to simplifying complex challenges and transforming intricate issues into actionable strategies. In today's installment of Smarter Sourcing, we're joined by Bill Courtney. Bill's an incredible guy who I've gotten to know over the last few years. He's either been the CFO or Senior Financial Executive at 7 different companies, including Hertz, Delta Airlines, Medtronic, Best Buy, and Bank of America, just to name a few. As you'll hear, Bill has been one of those senior executives who has pushed for his CPOs to be in the room where it all happens. Every time I get a chance to spend time with Bill, I'm always impressed with the clarity that he processes complex issues. He is the exact kind of CFO you would want to have as your partner, whether you're the CEO or CPO trying to manage your company through a challenging issue. Today, he'll explore how these roles are merging to close communication gaps, align strategic objectives, and effectively manage supply chain risks. Let's dive right into our conversation. Bill, thanks for being with us.
John, my pleasure. It's always good to get together with you. Thanks for having me.
So Bill and I have known each other for a while. So this conversation might be a little more relaxed and informal than some of the others. But here's my first question. I've never seen someone fail at retirement as much as you. Every time you retire, you can't do it.
You sound like my kids. I am a serial retirer, according to my kids. In fact, they have a pool going right now to whether I can stay retired. I've actually been retired a year and a half now, which is really good for me. So yeah.
It's unbelievable. Every time I talk to you, you got some, even in retirement, you got so much going on. I mean, you've had triplets, you've had weddings, and they're all moving into college at the same time, out of college at the same time. Oh my, It's been unbelievable.
It's been fun. Between that and profit and nonprofit boards I'm serving now, it's really utilizing a 36-year career to give back in a way that's, my choosing as opposed to the company choosing. So it's been a lot of fun.
So you've gone from, you've had top senior financial positions at so many different companies, but going back to Bank of America, Hertz, Medtronic, Starkey Herring, and then you retired, then CWT. My question to you is, out of all of those, the different businesses you've been at, Delta, which one was the hardest one? Which one did you say, man, this is complicated not just from a lots of work standpoint, hours, but just managing from a CFO finance standpoint? Which one was the hardest one?
They each presented unique challenges. And really my appreciation for procurement and sourcing came from my tenure at Ford Motor Company. And I came out of graduate school and went through the Ford MBA program, and the complexity of building a car, the complexity of a global supply chain, the tolerances that needed to be managed with the supplier, the timing of just-in-time inventory for plants around the world, and then the management of costs because the margins were thin, was really a great introduction for me into procurement. Each company that I've served in each industry I've played in, and I say play because it's been fun. I think you have to make your career an adventure and embrace it and have fun with it. Otherwise, it becomes a challenge to get up in the morning. The bigger companies like Bank of America had a very robust and developed supply chain. And I think you and I've talked before when I was at Delta. Delta at the time I joined, right before 9/11, had brought in a lot of GE individual. I came in from Ford. And we brought in a perspective on the power of supply chain. And really that helped us manage through the black swan of 9/11. Getting your suppliers on the phone, knowing where our equipment was. How do we manage that? How do we manage our labor? How do we manage our suppliers? It was all, it was an end-to-end effort. And I think if we hadn't had that discipline, I think, I'm biased, of course, but I think Delta went through it much more seamlessly, if you can say that, the event that was confronted us. And we came out in a pretty good position. I would say the smaller companies didn't have a strong appreciation for what procurement could do. But then one of the big companies that did, and I don't think Medtronic fully utilized it when I first joined there. And I think that was a journey of partnership with the CPO, John Klein, that enabled us to really bring home some significant value.
When you look at the car industry right now, it's changing before our eyes. Do you ever think to yourself, man, to be in there right now and just forget about managing the process, but really sourcing all the things you need to source now that you didn't have to source before, the lithium batteries, cars going hybrid, cars going electric. What are your thoughts on how Ford's doing and how some of the other companies are doing?
Well, it's interesting, John. You talk about the complete change of an industry. Would there be, with the announcements earlier around the heavy truck industry, before Easter, they announced that they're going to have to move towards an EV, or there's an effort to move towards EVs. That's completely retooling plants. That's retooling supply chains. Procurement's going to be on the front end of that. I think one of my, I've always had procurement at my leadership table, and that I don't view procurement and sourcing as being an order-taking organization. I view it as a key partner and strategic partner. We saw that, and we see that every day, not only in the change of it in the auto industry, but you see it in the technology industry. You see it in the sourcing. Sourcing has changed so dramatically over the last 20 years that it continues to evolve. And when I say sourcing, I mean outsourcing, offshore, nearshore, and onshore, and how that's changed. I think the other component that I'm monitoring is how is AI going to change this? How is cyber security and making sure that we understand our partners? I want my sourcing and procurement partners to understand the cyber aspect of the suppliers. Can they be shut down? Can they create a breach? When you look at a company like Medtronic, who I was, on the Finance Executive Council and Executive Committee there, we're dealing with HIPAA. And so we can't afford as a company for our suppliers not to have the SLAs and be competitive and compliant with those needs. And so the spectrum is growing. And so I think that historically, I think that people probably in many companies I've joined, including Best Buy, when it was going through its turnaround, looked at procurement, other than the merchandising part of Best Buy, as a necessary evil. They weren't a key partner. And I think that what we've seen over the last 20 years is they've been brought to the table as key partners, as to enablers, and to be thought leaders. And if the company's not using them that way, they're missing an opportunity.
So I was taking a look at your bio, and I thought to myself, from a finance standpoint, in terms of managing inventory, et cetera, I would think Hertz would have been a hard one. And I say that because every time I travel somewhere, I look at all the cars on the lot, and I'm like, How do you know where your fleet numbers should be at any given time, any given year, and trying to budget for that must be really hard. But maybe it was the simplest job you had.
It was one of the cleaner jobs, actually. We had, as the CFO of North America, or the Americas for Hertz, we had over 516,000 vehicles. What was the challenge there is we'd just gone through the Dollar Thrifty merger and had not really put the back-end systems in place to track the VIN numbers. And the nice thing about cars as an inventory is that they each have a VIN number. They're scannable. They can track them. The reality was that we didn't have, our systems weren't talking to each other. I've seen that repetitively in the industries and the companies I serve. When you go through a merger, not getting the back end all right can be more costly on the front end than you can imagine. And Hertz is one of those. I think that's one of the contributing challenges, not knowing where cars were. At any given point, during my tenure, we could have 11,000 vehicles in the Americas missing. And what do I mean by missing? Missing mean we had no visibility to where they were. They could have been on a Dollar Thrifty lot. They could have been on a Hertz lot. They could have been in the maintenance shed. They could have been in the impound lot in New York City. We didn't know where the cars were. They could still be on rental. They could have been stolen. And so by virtue of not having a really good back-end system and not taking the time to negotiate, but looking at the synergies that were there, and the benefits of the back end that would drive the front end, we missed an opportunity. So if you think about that, 11,000 assets missing on an average value of $20,000, $30,000, you have hundreds of millions of dollars on your balance sheet that, in all candor, we just didn't know where they were. We had an idea and we tracked them down, but it was week in and week out. No, that leads me to John. One of the best companies I served with for acquisitions and mergers, and really having the courage, and I use that word intentionally, to look at the overlapping systems and the sunset system that was not, we took the emotion out of it. We sunset the system that was not optimal with Bank of America. And if you think about the 2000 era of the acquisitions that they were doing, a major acquisitions, fleet of $35 billion, MB&A at $50 billion. The ability to go in and look at and partner with this, because when you have to negotiate your way out of these contracts, you have to have procurement there, you have to have sourcing there to negotiate your contracts, and to have the courage and have the objectivity to look at, we have two competing providers here. Who's the better provider? And who should we keep? And not because we have a love affair with who the company is or the system that we're adapted to. It's really getting in there and saying, okay, this is the better system. And having a sourcing partner, procurement partner help facilitate those conversations, helped us make better decisions. And when you're feeling, we talked about Hertz and 11,000 vehicles, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you think about a bank the size of Bank of America, JP Morgan, Citigroup, having a systems hiccup and going down, you're talking billions. And so they really having a partner that helps us negotiate and those deals, looking at them end to end early in the process proactively was invaluable.
So when you think about all the different roles that you've had and the places you've been and the different procurement people that you've come in contact with and served with, what do you think, if you were to craft your perfect CPO, it's that person who has a seat at the table and really brought what skills to the table beyond just being, really good at, 3 bids and a buy?
I think there's several things I really look for. First of all, somebody who can take the complex and make it simple. I mean, that is critical. I mean, you can sit there and tell me what the problems are all day and make it more complex, but if you can simplify it, because that enables me to sit with the board, that enables me to sit with the CEO, it sits with the business leader, the COO, that the change may be impacting. So one, having a CPO that can help you take the complex and make it simple. Second is a CPO that asks why. They're sitting there with you and saying, well, maybe that doesn't make sense. Challenging convention and wisdom, not being somebody that brings what I call silent no's to the table. Nothing frustrates me more than for them to listen in a meeting and have a silent no, have a different opinion and not put it on the table in the meeting. So I really value that partner who has the ability to say, and not tell me what they feel, but tell me what they believe. Hey, Bill, I believe that we should be looking at it this way. And challenging me because we're smarter collectively than we are individually. So if I don't have that CPO partner who wants to be at the table, understands that it is time consuming to be in my leadership team meetings, but understands also that 1 + 1 will equal 3 if we partner, is really critical to me. So.
Yeah, no, I can't agree with you more. And I love the way you put it, the silent no. Someone is disagreeing with you, but they don't have the guts to speak up at the table, but you hear about it later on. Let's talk about 9/11 for a second, because they're talking about a situation where you get all your assets grounded, and not all in the right position where they need to be to when you restarted. What was that like at Delta?
It was an amazing morning. I had just taken a new job at Delta and was called into. We knew the profile, we knew what was going on. I was called upstairs to the operating center very, very early. Now, to your point around assets again and asset tracking, it's amazing how well the FAA and the airlines, even back in 2000, 2001, were tracking equipment. Before the second plane hit the second tower, we knew the profile. We knew they were transcons. We knew they were wide body. We knew they were using them the way they were using them, which is very unfortunate. But it became a situation where procurement came to the table. We had people around the world. We had flight crews. We had meetings going on around the world. We had employees. So first of all, tracking our employees, getting on the phone and saying, sit tight. Having a rental car or having a hotel room, 9/10 of the law is possession. So don't give up your hotel room. We had people that were in Hong Kong saying, we can get to Switzerland. Would that be easier to get home once they open up the airspace? And we said, no, retain the rooms, stay where you are, we'll get you home. And it's going to take several days to figure out. The other thing, if you think back on what was going on, I was at that point over revenue recognition and control. And it was a Tuesday, we were trying to make payroll on Friday, and the banks were locking up our lines. So it really was a catalyst for us, not only during the moment of the crisis, to understand where things were, where assets were, where people were, who our suppliers were, how the impact was going to be, and trying to look down the different lanes to say how we're going to manage it. But really taking away the learnings from it. Where were the gaps? And sometimes people get through a crisis and don't do the postmortem. We did the postmortem to say, wait a second, where were the inefficiencies that would enable us to do better? And those were key learnings, actually better learnings than getting prepared for it, because nobody could have seen that warning happening to us.
So I want to move from Delta to both Starkey and Medtronics, because in both situations, Starkey with the hearing aids, Medtronics, the pumps for diabetes and other medical equipment. I think I told you my daughter's type 1. And man, I can't imagine also from the, budgeting and planning standpoint, because you've got such a heavy compliance aspect to both of those business, being that they're in the medical equipment device arena. Right. Those two companies, did you like one more than the other? Was one more challenging than the other?
Just because of the scale, they were more challenging. I joke, when I joined Medtronic, I'd been there about 8 weeks. We had at the time a great CFO, Gary Ellis. And Gary and I are having a kind of a touch base meeting, and Gary said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I think I figured out our problem. And he said, what is it? He said, we make too much money. The margins in med device were very big. And I said, what that? And he said, he kind of looked at me and said, well, how's that a problem? And I said, because it inhibits our ability to go after the efficiencies that are there. And so, he got that very, very quickly. We had just done the Covidian acquisition, a $50 billion acquisition. We're trying to merge not only cultures, but back-end systems, procurement systems, and we were running in verticals. And how do we run in a horizontal and get the economies of scale? And a company that professional, that big, and that good, with that kind of talent, it was easier to move that ball. Although there were verticals within that didn't want to play nicely, it took us time. And again, back to what I said to you earlier, you couldn't tell people what you felt. You had to tell them what you believed and why you believed it. We'll support those beliefs with facts. If you got there, you could change it. And to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, we could take out of the business. Starkey, on the other end of the spectrum, was more entrepreneurial. It was private. You had a lot more flexibility. And consequently, that was an organization where procurement and sourcing was an order-taking operation. And so moving them towards, fortunately, I joined at about the same time we brought in a COO who came in from GE Healthcare. And he and I spent a lot of evenings looking at saying, okay, where can we get efficiencies? It's another industry with big margins, but drawing upon our experiences, we had to start down the path of a changing perspective and driving value and driving globalization. I think one of my favorite stories we got into, Medtronic, actually, we were able to outsource some of our engineering overseas. Now we're engineering parts, to your point, for diabetes patients, with one of their big businesses, cardiovascular, heart monitors, stents, pacemakers. If we could outsource that type of equipment, that kind of engineering, where if it goes wrong, people's lives are at risk, then being able to do that with a hearing aid should have been something that would have been easily accepted. It took us a while to get that through, to say we can get some benefits out of leveraging our outsourcing partners to use the follow the sun model, to use resources that we don't have in-house to drive greater productivity and better products. So very different models. Like I said, Medtronic, because by virtue of the size, scale, and profitability, it was a journey that was different. To Starkey, which was profitable, smaller, more entrepreneurial, at about $1.5 billion in revenue and global. You can't go in with an ivory tower mentality. I think you have to treat each one like you mentioned. I have triplets, but each one of my girls is very, very different. I treat each one of them, with respect and who they are as an individual. I think you have to treat it as each industry and each company, and then look as a specific vertical, but then look for the horizontal golden threads between those where you drive value.
And so something you told me prior was, it's amazing how much the Jack Welch GE mentality has sort of permeated through some of the large companies you've been at. and even through sourcing and procurement. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's an interesting topic.
There was a period, and it's unfortunate. I think some of that discipline has disappeared, but I think some of that Six Sigma discipline was value driving. I think the discipline that was driven through GE through the Welsh days benefited because of the intense focus on cost and the management of cost, the intense focus on quality. You didn't compromise quality for cost. You found the balance that drove that. I've repetitively served with the leaders from the legacy GE organization, the legacy Ford organization, that have brought that discipline to new companies and to new organizations and industries where they've benefited from it. I see as the years progress and that becomes a distant memory, it's how do you preserve some of those disciplines and sense of urgencies in today's culture. It's going to be a challenge.
So fast forward to your last attempt at retirement, and you get pulled back into CWT. CWT, the biggest competitor to American Express Global Travel, one of those huge companies that most people have never heard of, but if they've worked in a big company, they've probably used before. And that was we were brought in for a prepackaged bankruptcy, correct?
Bankruptcy.
So now that one, I also have to imagine you had to have your procurement person played a vital role in the turnaround of that company. What was that like?
Well, it's actually interesting. It's fortuitous we're talking about it because American Express just acquired CWT within the last 2 weeks.
Right.
It was just announced. CWT, I was brought out of retirement by an executive who was at Delta with me through the 9/11 situation. And the lady who recruited me out of retirement had been the CFO at CWT and stepped into the CEO role when the black swan event of COVID hit. Now think about that. In April 2020, they had negative earnings or negative revenue of 105%. And why is that? It's because everybody was prepaying. So you had all these deposits. We had to refund the deposit because the world stopped and you have no revenue and you don't have the discipline in there to manage your costs. So they transitioned the CFO to the CEO role and brought me in. They both had very focused efforts on managing costs, working with the banks, working with the attorneys, working with the providers, because we were asking for extensions on things. When you go through a bankruptcy, you're asking for new terms, and not everybody wants to give you new terms. And so having a really good legal team and having a really good procurement team enabled us to package it. When we went in front of the bankruptcy court, and the judge said, having studied it, we were actually successful in doing it in a one-day pre-pack, once restructuring $1.6 billion in debt and equity. And judge said to us, he said, I've never seen a more complex revenue stream and income statement than this one. And it's true. It was a very complex model. And so scrambling around getting suppliers, because our suppliers, we were an intermediary to hotels, airlines, hotels, restaurants, event planning venues, you name it. We were that intermediary. So we were booking and we were working with clients on the other end to provide those services. The client stopped, the providers had planned for these events, and we were in the middle trying to negotiate between the two. And so having procurement step up, and that was not a comfortable place for them because they historically had not had to do that. It had always been kind of a gravy train kind of industry and role with complex contracts, but nothing like that where the world stopped. We had an inability to pay. We had no lines of credit. We were bankrupt, and negotiating both ends of that, one trying to keep our clients on the front end and then keep our providers on the back end was incredibly complex and a lot of long hours.
I'll tell you, I told my kids this, and I said, I've been through two situations where brought in to do a turnaround of bankrupt companies. And it's a hard situation when you're in it, but you look back, at least I did, and say to myself, you learn a lot during those situations because you learn about business, but you also learn about yourself because you have to make decisions that are like the most dispassionate decisions ever. I mean, it is only about turning the company around and saving the company. What'd you learn about yourself? And first of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, what did you learn?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that with a company like CWT, where you had a lot of 30 and 40-year employees, that muscle memory was very, very tough. And as a finance leader, sometimes you want to go to the facts and you try and be dispassionate, but you can't be. You have to respect what they're going through. You have to be try and bring them through it. Not everybody is going to get through that. And I learned that I had to, I'm a driver. I'm a type A personality. I want things done. I want it done right. I want it done now. But I had to step back and say, you know what, how do I bring these people through the journey? Because when we come out of bankruptcy, we're going to have to run this company. Who are the people that they're going to sit down with you and understand the challenges that confront us and be willing to make changes to support the challenges, the changes that need to be implemented? And who are the people that weren't? And sometimes you have to make some tough decisions, like we all do, and no matter whether the company's good or bad, about letting people go. We had to let people go. Sometimes we had to let people go, even though they were with the program. And so it brought me back to my roots of saying, I have to be a compassionate leader, but at the same time, I can't let that compassion let me make bad decisions, because it really, I think it kind of correlates to what we did at 9/11. Delta was the last airline to lay off people. We knew the business model had changed dramatically. And what we did is we looked at, where did the work come out? And I think that's true for all companies. When you go through a transformation, where does the work come out? And that's where you cut the people. You can't arbitrarily say, I'm going to take out 20% of my workers, because some organizations within your company are more stretched than others. Some are sitting fat and happy. 20% doesn't bother them. You really have to get surgical and say, where am I taking out the people? Because you're not just laying off people, you're laying off families. You're impacting people beyond that employee. And so with CWT, I used that Delta premise of saying, where was the work coming out? Where was the work not going to come back? And that's where we focused our energies, as opposed to just trying to take a paintbrush and saying, well, we're going to cut everything. Because if we cut everything, we were not going to be strategically positioned to restart the business when we came out of bankruptcy.
How did the role of the CPO or anybody sourcing procurement change after the pandemic and the worldwide supply chain crisis? Everyone I talked to on this program has said that, that they had a seat at the table that they never had before, or their seat had a lot more leverage or a lot more importance than it had before. What was your impression of how COVID and the pandemic has changed the role of the CPO?
I think that the role of the CPO has changed from the standpoint of what you just described. I think they showed their value. They mobilized. They understood the business better than I think sometimes people give them credit for. So I think the CPO came to the table, and I think in my position, is that the CPO is there on an ongoing basis. It wasn't just an event to have the CPO as a key leadership table. I think that their stock rose across the board because they were pre-Herculean. They're still dealing with it. They're not out of the woods yet with the real estate, commercial real estate, and bringing people back to work, and the stakeholders that are impacted by this procurement touches. And so I think that they had a chance to rise to the occasion. I think they did a really good job. The Chief Procurement Officer at CWT actually is interesting. He was a procurement guy with me at Delta. And he started looking at these golden threads of where your careers cross again and again, the 6 degrees of separation. And he reported to me, and he's still there. But his ability, I think, going through 9/11 and then being called upon in a company that had not understood or valued and see the CPO the way they should, was really called out during the crisis after the COVID pandemic. And it really solidified their position at the leadership table. They're not too deep anymore. It's the CEO. They should be at the table. And they're always at my table. One of the first things I've done at every company, whether they directly reported to me or indirectly reported to me, is they attend to my staff meetings, because we were talking about the future. We were talking about planning. We were talking about next year and doing cycle plans in 5 years. And having that procurement leader at the table in those discussions was valuable. And I think that COVID just highlighted that. And hopefully people don't become numb to that and move them back off that table in the future.
Was there a moment for you, and you've had so many different roles, was there a moment for you that you said, procurement's an important position in this company? I mean, I'm probably going way back in your career, well, whether it was your first CFO position or at some point, did it dawn on you that, man, you need to stay close to this person because, they can make or break your year?
We talked earlier about it. I think that Ford had such a culture around that it was ingrained in me early. And if I didn't believe it at Ford, let me tell you, getting to Delta, getting to Bank of America, getting to these other companies just further solidified that and really gave me an appreciation for how they need to be brought in and partnered with and respected. Again, they're not order takers. They're key partners at the table. So I think it was, for me, it was indoctrinated early through the disciplines that Ford had and the value of Carlos Mazarin and his organization back when I joined in the mid-90s. And again, COVID, every time there's an event, there's a black swan event, whether it be 9/11 or the banking crisis of 07, 08. As you know, I moved on to Barclays and was CFO Tech and Ops globally for Barclays in London. When you're going through a crisis like that, having your procurement partner, we were dealing with real estate, we were dealing with outsourcing contracts, we were dealing with technology. Again, they become as critical to me as to almost my FP&A head or my controller, because they are bringing a perspective together that builds the legs of a stool. It comes together to drive value.
That's great. So, Bill, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you staying a little longer than we planned. I just got to ask you, the pictures in back of you, are those pencil drawings or what are those? The ones hanging?
Which ones?
Well, the one on your right shoulder. Yeah.
Those are Italian French. You'd appreciate this.
Look at that.
Italian paper. Those are quail. Those are hunting friends that I have a series. My grandfather had them in his office. He was an attorney and had them in one of his conference rooms. And they're a sequence of quails from around the world, and they were printed in Italy. So they have those, and then of course the ship in the back. We're looking out over the intercoastal and watching. There's a couple fishing boats out here in the bay off our house right now, so watching the world kind of go by.
So you're finally getting retirement right. You're finally starting to get it down.
I am, John. But it's good to have friends like you to be able to reach out to and say it's a weak moment. You say no, it's not so weak. I kind of go forward.
You probably have a tea time coming up, so I
do. I have a 1:00 tea time. I pushed it back for you.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. If you need to get back in touch, let me know. It's always good talking to you, and we'll connect soon.
All right, great. And so everybody listening and watching, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Smarter Sourcing. I'm John Pavia. Thanks.